Bismillah, we begin the recitation with calm hearts and clear intention. Every letter, every sound, read the Qur'an the way it was sent down. The way it was sent down.
The letters ghain and kha are almost identical in how they are produced, with very minor differences. Both of these letters make use of the movement of two articulators, or pronunciation organs. First, we make use of the root of the tongue, which is the farthest area of the tongue. Second, we also use the soft palate, and the soft palate is that soft part, which is not bony, located at the furthest area of the roof of the mouth. Both kha and ghain need these two organs to be properly produced. And since ghain is produced at a point that is slightly deeper than kha, we're going to start with ghain. Ghain is produced when the root of the tongue is raised to be almost touching the soft palate. أغ أغ أغنياء يغشى يغشى فراغ. And here we gotta notice two important things. Number one, notice that I said the root of the tongue is almost touching the soft palate, not fully touching, because the sound of ghain is a continuous sound, which means that it can be extended for as long as you want. Agh, agh, yaghsha. So, the root of the tongue should not be pressing on the soft palate, but there should be enough space allowing the sound to continue. The second thing is, the sound of ghain is not produced by pushing air or breath out. It is rather produced by vibrating your vocal cords, which is something that you can feel when you touch your throat with your hand when pronouncing the ghain. Agh, agh. You should definitely feel some vibration on your throat. So the root of the tongue is raised to the point of almost connecting to the farthest area of the soft palate, producing the ghain. Now, moving on to the kha sound, which is the same movement as ghain, with a few differences. So, kha is produced when the root of the tongue is raised to the point of almost touching the soft palate. Kha is also a continuous sound that can be extended for as long as you want, so there is no complete connection or touching between the two organs. But the first difference is the kha is produced from an area that is slightly after the ghain, as you can see in this chart. So ghain is a little bit deeper than kha. The second difference is that the kha sound is a voiceless sound, which means that it is produced by pushing a gush of air through the opening created between the root of the tongue and the soft palate. To understand what I mean, try touching your throat when pronouncing the kha sound. You should feel no vibration whatsoever, since you should not be using your vocal cords. يخرج يخرج اختلاف اختلاف. Now, what are the common mistakes that we should avoid when producing these two sounds? We're going to start with the common mistakes of the ghain. The first common mistake is when the root of the tongue is pressed against the soft palate. This is usually caused by exaggerating the pronunciation of ghain, and also happens to most beginners. The result is that the sound will stop and it will sound more like a qaf rather than ghain. It sounds like this. Al-maqdoob yaqsha. While the sound of ghain should flow smoothly and it has the ability to continue. Al-maghdoob yaghsha yaghsha. The second mistake is if the ghain is followed by qaf. There is a chance of mixing both of these two sounds together or assimilating them into one another, since these two sounds are rather close as to where they come from. The mistake sounds like this. تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا. While it should sound like two separate letters, since these two sounds cannot and should not be assimilated. تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا. The third mistake is adding qalqala to ghain, like that. غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ. This is also a side effect of the first mistake. So pressing too much on the articulator may cause qalqala to happen, to allow the sound to escape. But of course, ghain is not a qalqala letter, so it should not receive any qalqala whatsoever. The last mistake of ghain is mixing its sound with kha. When ghain is surrounded by voiceless sounds, some learners tend to make ghain also voiceless. The result is that it will sound more like kha rather than ghain, like in this word. Istaghfir. Istaghfir. Now the ta and the fa are both voiceless. So for some people it might be difficult to switch from voiceless, voiced, and then voiceless again. But this is of course a serious mistake that should not be made when reciting the Qur'an, because it can potentially change the meaning of the word. So we should say Istaghfir. Istaghfir. Finally, there is just one mistake to be avoided with the kha, and that is mixing the sound of kha with kind of the sound of snoring. The snoring sound is produced at an area that is much closer to the opening of the mouth rather than the throat. And this mistake is caused by exaggerating the sound of kha way too much. And it sounds like this. يخرج يخرج اختلاف اختلاف. And this is of course not correct because the sound of kha should become from much deeper in the mouth, in fact from the nearest part of the throat. يخرج اختلاف. So the throat as an area of articulation produces these 6 sounds or letters from 3 articulation points. These sounds might be quite challenging in Arabic because of how deep they come from, which makes it almost impossible to observe the movement of the organs. We'll start tackling a new area of articulation, which is the tongue. As a matter of fact, the tongue produces the most sounds. In fact, there are 18 letters that are produced from the tongue through 10 different articulation points, or makharij. To study these sounds easily and effectively, the tongue is divided into 4 areas. Each area has 1 or more articulation points. The 4 areas of the tongue are the deepest part of the tongue, the middle part, the edge of the tongue, and the tip of the tongue. In this lesson, we'll start with the deepest part. This part of the tongue produces 2 sounds for 2 letters, qaf and kaf, which are produced from 2 articulation points from that area. So let's start with qaf. Qaf is produced when the deepest part of the tongue makes contact with the soft palate. So there is touching between the tongue and the soft palate. The result is something that sounds like this. Aqqa, aqqa, qal, yaqul, al-falaq. If you're struggling with pronouncing qaf, or when you try to produce it, it sounds more like an English K rather than qaf. Then you should try a simple trick, which is to try and practice this sound when lying on your back. This process makes the contact between the tongue and the soft palate much easier. It also helps you to train the muscles to make the correct movement and pronounce qaf correctly. So, to produce qaf, the back of the tongue should be raised to make contact with the soft palate, and the sound will be produced. Moving on to kaf. To produce the Arabic kaf, it is almost the same movement made for qaf. So the back of the tongue is raised to touch the area between the soft palate and the hard palate. The hard palate is that bony area. It is also the roof of your mouth. So the Arabic kaf will be produced when these two organs touch. And it should sound like this. Ak, ak, ذكرك, مناسككم. We should also notice that when the Arabic kaf is produced, there is a slight gush of air or breath that is produced along with it. We call that hams, and this is most clear when kaf is in sukun position. ذكرى, ذكرى, كذكركم, كذكركم. And to understand the mechanism even better, let's put the kaf side by side to the qaf and see what the differences are. First, we see that the movement of the back of the tongue is very similar, if not identical. The difference with qaf is that it is a little bit deeper into the mouth, as it is only touching the soft palate, and the sound is produced at that point. But for the kaf, the sound is produced when the deepest part of the tongue is touching the area between the soft palate and the hard palate. So it is a little bit behind the pronunciation point of qaf, closer to the opening of the mouth. Qa, qa, ke, ke, aqqa, ak. Now it is time to highlight some of the common mistakes and bad practices with these two sounds. As for the qaf, the common mistake that is usually made by beginners is producing qaf way deeper than it should be. This happens when you try to exaggerate the sound, so it becomes way heavier and more difficult to pronounce than it should. And the mistakes sound like this. Qa, qa, qalu. This is also detected when you hear a hint of kha or ghain along with the sound of qaf. Qalu. While the tongue should be touching the soft palate to make it sound like a correct qaf, like this. Qa, qalu. The second mistake is when qaf has sukun and you don't apply qalqala on it. This leads to making qaf sound inaudible, as if it is not there, especially when it comes at the end of the word. The mistake sounds like this. Al-haq, khalaq. So to show the qaf, you must apply qalqala to make sure that it is audible. Al-haq, khalaq. Now moving on to kaf. The most common mistake for kaf is applying qalqala on it, especially when it has sukun. Like so. أكبر أكبر فأهلكناهم. So this is not the way to pronounce kaf. There should not be any qalqala. However, it should be pronounced with hams as we indicated before. أكبر فأهلكناهم. And we'll highlight hams even more when we start talking about the sifat of letters. So these were the two letters that belong to the deepest part of the tongue. Jim is produced when the middle part of the tongue is raised, making contact with the hard palate. Remember, the two organs, the tongue and the hard palate, must be touching. Otherwise, the sound of jim will be incorrect. Edge, edge. جاء فج تجري تجري. Notice the sound of jim in Arabic is a plosive sound, and this means two things. First, the sound is made by completely blocking the flow of air before it leaves the body and makes the sound. Second, the sound cannot be maintained or extended. Edge, edge. So once the sound is released, you cannot maintain it or keep it going. Moving on to the second letter, sheen. In its technique, sheen is very similar to that of jim. So the middle part of the tongue is raised towards the hard palate. But there is one major difference. With sheen, there is no connection or touching between the hard palate and the middle part of the tongue whatsoever. So, unlike jim, sheen is a fricative sound, which means that it is produced by the sound of air passing through the small space that is created. That's why sheen is a continuous sound that will flow as long as you can push air out. Ash, ash. الشيطان غواش يغشى. So the middle part of the tongue is raised, but it doesn't make contact with the hard palate. And now the last letter, which is the ya. Specifically, الياء غير المادية. In English, we call that ya as a semi-vowel. So what is الياء غير المادية, or the semi-vowel? Well, الياء المادية is the ya that functions as a vowel. And this happens when the ya is preceded by a letter that has kasra. And الياء غير المادية is a semi-vowel because it can accept short vowels like fatha, dhamma, or kasra, which happens only if it is preceded by anything other than kasra. Compare these examples. المساكين مستقيم إبراهيم البيوت قريش اليتامى يوما. Notice الياء غير المادية is preceded by anything other than kasra. But notice how every ya maddiya is preceded by kasra. Now, both of these two types of ya come from two different articulation points. Al-ya al-maddiya was previously discussed. Can you still remember where it is pronounced from? But as for al-ya غير المادية, it is pronounced from the middle part of the tongue, which is raised towards the hard palate. But the point at which ya is produced is slightly behind the point of Shin and Jim, as you can see in the chart. There is also a gap allowing air to escape and produce the sound. أي أي تبين شيء عليهم. Here are the three sounds of the middle part of the tongue side by side to compare their technique and their sounds. أج أج أش أش أي أي. Finally, since these letters are quite common in many languages around the world, there aren't many common mistakes related to them, except for one, which is related to Jim. Some learners leave a little gap between the tongue and the hard palate, which turns the Jim into a continuous fricative sound. Zzz. And this sound does not exist in the Qur'an at all. This mistake sounds like this. الجنة وجيء أجرهم أجرهم. And this is how they are supposed to sound like. الجنة وجيء أجرهم أجرهم. So these are the three sounds that are produced from the middle part of the tongue. Jim, Shin, الياء غير المادية. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Bismillah, we begin the recitation with calm hearts and clear intention. Every letter, every sound, read the Qur'an the way it was sent down. The way it was sent down.